Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Hong Kong Trade Development Council, I would like to welcome you all to today's seminar on the occasion of the 2024 Hong Kong Book Fair. Today, we are very honored to have Mr. Sheung to share with us Minority Vibrations 2, Writing Autofiction. Before we begin, I would like to request your attention to the following matters. First, the seminar will be conducted in English. Second, please switch off your mobile phones or switch them to silent mode during the event to avoid any disruptions. Third, filming or recording is not allowed at this event. Should you wish to see a recap of the seminar, you will be able to find a recording of the event on the Hong Kong Book Fair's YouTube channel. Furthermore, if you have any questions regarding the content of the seminar, you can raise them during the Q&A session near the end of the event. Last but not least, the book shared this workshop will be available for purchase outside the venue. There will also be a book signing session at the end of this event. You are kindly asked to follow our instructions and queue up in an orderly manner when the book signing session commences. Thank you for your kind attention. Without further ado, please join me and give a round of applause to welcome our guest speaker, Mr. Sheung. Before we begin our session, may I also invite Ms. Laura Mannering to come up and deliver some opening remarks. Ms. Mannering, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming to our event, and thank you to the HKTDC for having us. Our events that we have in collaboration with HKTDC are actually a little sample of our events that we host regularly each year. This year, our events will be March 1st to 8th. Please do grab a bookmark, have a look at our website, and consider joining some of our events in 2025. As well, as you can see up on the screen, we have some summertime events while our 3 speakers who are participating in the book fair events are here with us in Hong Kong. So tomorrow we have a lunch event, we have a literary lounge, and we also have 2 more workshops with our speakers on Tuesday. So please have a look, and if you can come and attend and buy tickets and support our festival, we would be very grateful. So I will pass things over to Sheung and enjoy the workshop.
Thank you so much for having me and for coming, and thank you for the introductions. All right. Oh, this is so formal for a literary workshop. Usually it's in a very tight table, but hopefully this works out. Feel free to sit closer if you feel comfortable. All right. So the title of this workshop is called Minority Vibrations 2, Writing Autofiction. This actually comes from an ongoing project that I have been working on called Minority Vibration. And then Minority Vibration 1 is actually a publication in a literary magazine from Canada called the Expo. And then I'd invited a bunch of Asian diasporic writers and artists to participate in it, and we made kind of this magazine together that includes visual art, poetry, prose as well. And when I was writing the introduction to this publication, I was thinking, okay, this is just a bunch of random people who kind of want to use art to articulate their kind of the complexities of their existence, right? So if I introduce it in a very kind of academic way or formal way, it will kind of lack a kind of personal touch. It also feel a little bit institutional and kind of pretentious. So I went with writing about just random things that were happening in my life as I was working on the editing of this magazine. So it starts with this moment when I 4 years ago, I stopped teaching my university job in Canada, and then I moved to China during COVID. And so I'm co-teaching with a science teacher, she's a chemist. And then she started asking the students, are atoms matter? My co-teacher asked. I put on my hand when she instructs all of those who think that atoms are matter too. And to my answer, a student, also a Chinese Canadian living in China, he's from Vancouver as well, tells me that I'm stupid and asks if I even went to university, to which some of the other students chuckle. Are atoms matter? My co-teacher asked. Oh, sorry, I read this already. Moments before, I read through Christine Tran's prose poem, Knife Child Walks Away from Malus. Minority's Vibration, these two words from Tran's poem should be the title of this opening essay. So here I have these random moments, but it's intertwined with my working on this thing. So the point of autofiction is that it's not pretending that it is writing that's trying to convince you of another world, another reality, but it is part of this reality, and writing about this reality is part of it as well. So there are two simultaneous things happening. You have yourself writing this, and also you have the writing. If we want to see a little bit more. At the time of this writing, I've been here in China, in Shenzhen, for 4 months and out of quarantine for 3. At the time of this writing, my apartment is too big, has too many rooms, and is a little too expensive. At the time of this writing, I have almost nothing in my kitchen. I either eat out or order takeout. At the time of this writing, I'm coming down with a cold. At the time of this writing is 2021, and Huawei CFO Ma Wenzhou just returned to China and landed in Shenzhen from Vancouver. At the time of her arrival, Ma Wenzhou's name and slogans welcoming her are projected all over the skyscrapers in Futian in red. At the time of this writing, Justin Trudeau had just been re-elected. So as we're writing about these things, you kind of would realize that a lot of the, academically, we call this the structure of feelings, right? There's the dominant culture, the residual culture, emergent culture that comes in to form the kind of present. The dominant is, of course, the mainstream, what's happening right now. Residual would be the things that are kind of going away and becoming the past. And there's the emergent, which is often comes through the writing, because when we're writing, we're trying to articulate something better about the present, and something new would kind of emerge. So as an exercise, since this is a workshop, let's try to do the same thing. At the time of this writing, start 6 sentences using the phrase, at the time of this writing, and situate yourself in this kind of presence and find your kind of structure of feelings. Let's take 6 minutes, 1 minute per sentence. All right. How did that go? Okay, so just now we kind of situated ourselves in a kind of historical presence, right? Because at the time of this writing, all of these other things are kind of going on, and hopefully, when you like look back at what you had just written, you would like kind of remember the moment when this was being written. We'll continue to add to what you have written down as we go through this kind of talk. So put that aside for now, and we'll come back to it. Well, all right. The term autofiction is not really a literary genre. Rather, it's just a term used in literary criticism in the form of like a fictionalized autobiography, right? It's not really a memoir, and it's not really an autobiography, because autobiographies are often about famous people. Most writers are unfortunately not. So it doesn't really help when one is actually writing. And the idea of genre in general, or to categorize literature in this way, might not be helpful for writers as well. We'll see some writers talking about that. Because by having very clear categories, it actually doesn't really help you articulate what you kind of want to write. So more recently, a lot of writers kind of gear towards genreless writing. Autofiction kind of moves in the kind of liminal space between different forms. There's also auto theory as well. That's like between art criticism, philosophy, and fiction, and autobiography. So all of these things, it's kind of a multidisciplinary approach to writing. And here I have an example from Taeju Ko. He's a writer, photographer, art historian, Nigerian-American artist. And here he published in his book, it's just a bunch of emails between him and Alexander Haman, who's a Bosnian writer. And the two of them are talking about how they find categories kind of frustrating. So Haman writes that, I've always found the insistence distinction between fiction and nonfiction in Anglo-American writing very annoying, indeed troubling. For one thing, it implies that nonfiction is all the stuff outside of fiction, or the other way around, the yin and yang of writing. Another problem, it marks a text in terms of its relation to truth, a category, and is presumably self-evident and therefore stable. But narration cannot contain stable truth because it unfolds. And it does so before the narrator in one way and before the listener reader in another way. Narration is creation of truth, which is to say that truth does not precede it. So from a writer's point of view, you're not writing about truth. You're creating new truth as you are writing, is what Haman is trying to say. You get to a kind of truth as you're writing. So just now when we were saying at the time of this writing, we're not writing about truth, but by juxtapositioning the different lines at this present moment, there's something about this moment that is true, that is created through what you had just written. The conversation goes on. Taeju Ko kind of responds. From an art historian point of view, he says that it doesn't really make sense because only writers have these categories. He's saying that if you look at a painting by Monet, the painting, the artist won't be like, oh, this is a nonfiction painting, or like, this is a realist painting. It's a combination of what he thinks is the imagined. It says here. It's a combination of what is observed, what is imagined, and what is overheard, and what's been done before. So again, all of these things go back to the concept of what Raymond Williams calls the structure of feelings, right? There's always a dominant, a residual, and an emergent culture, and it's a combination of all of these things. And as we are writing, these things come together and merge into one that records our historical presence. It's quite interesting. The conversation continues with Haman talking about the idea of concentric narration. What is concentric narration? concentric narration is a story inside a story inside a story. So it's knowledge about the past instead of facts about the past. So what an example of that is that he said that she said that he said that this happened. One of the examples that I thought was on here is one by Lydia Davis, where she writes about the happiest moment, and she says if you ask him what his happiest moment is, it would be that a moment when her wife went to Beijing and her wife had duck there, and she telling him that story is the happiest moment of his life. So here we have knowledge about something that had happened, and the telling of the story creates a kind of circular truth. Right? There's the concentric narration that kind of happens. It's not about the fact that she had duck, right? That's not the point of the story. The point of the story is that that is her happiest moment, and that she felt compelled to share that with him. And whoever is the narrator is asking this person about this person's happiest moment, right? So this circle of communication is how the meaning kind of emerges in this little short story, right? So that has nothing to do with a truth, right? It's through the telling of story, through narration, where truth unfolds, going back to what Haman was saying there. All right. The idea of liminality is basically just between spaces, right? Between spaces that are stable. And often narrators that occupy the space have a kind of autofictional approach to writing. Right, and what is the point of being comfortable in this space? Well, let's look at a couple examples. This is Kenzaburo Oe, and he won the Nobel Prize in '94. He's famous for his work, A Personal Matter, where, is anybody familiar with him? Daigong Gin Samlong. So he's famous for this kind of very confessional style of writing that's barely a novel. It's just like him confronting the human feelings that he has. So in this novel, him and his wife has a child, and the child has brain hernia, and he's a 27-year-old part-time university lecturer, and he doesn't really want to stay in Japan. He always fantasizes about like traveling in Africa, and so he's struggling to decide whether it's more human to let the child live, or like, because the child's going to suffer his whole life if to even like not have the child anymore. And as he's going through this process, he has to confront a lot of the darker feelings about his own humanity and society at the time. And this kind of very confessional style of writing, of course, it's a combination of all of those things that Tejuko talks about: the history, the present, what is observed, what is made up, what is imagined, right? And of course, this leads to the question, then is all writing just autobiographical, if all writing and the process of which we're just going through all of these motions? Well, Yuan Li says that she doesn't really understand when people say her book, Where Reasons End, is autofiction, because I can't really know what that means. Certainly the book and my life, there's a lot of interwoven there. The book is precisely a conversation the parent and son have, but it's not accurate. So Where Reasons End, it's a really fantastic book, but it's a mother talking to the child, and the child had already passed away, and the conversations happen in this space that's like, we don't know if it's the afterlife, but it's somewhere in between the afterlife and the writer's position. So, and as the conversation goes, I think even though she's writing from the point of view of her son who had passed away, there's some kind of truth that's being found, and it creates room for like introspection, and that can only happen, and that kind of truth kind of emerges as she kind of continues with these made-up conversations. So, much like Kenzaburo Oe, through the writing, there's a kind of truth that kind of emerges, right? And she insists that it is a novel. And then the journalist asks her, do you think all writing are autobiographical then? She simply says, yeah, all writing is autobiographical. Here's another example. We saw two examples of writers that are using writing to come to a kind of truth about the world. But there's also a tradition of writers who just like want to play with reality. This is I Love Dick by Chris Kraus. She's famous for art critic, filmmaker. And what she does is she toys with reality. What she does is she just creates a character who's basically herself, and then she kind of does things in the writing and in her life, kind of in a way to like perform it and to write about it later. So the book is about her and her partner, Sylvain Latager, both of whom are real people. They've been married for a long time. They're no longer romantic or intimate, and they encountered this man called Dick Blank. We don't know who he is, but if you Google it, you can quite easily find who he is. And then what she does is like she writes these one-way love letters to Dick that are very intellectual, and because Dick is a postmodern theorist, so she's kind of like trolling him. She never gets a response from him, but the whole book is just them kind of confronting the failure of their marriage, while at the same time using this kind of sarcastic performance to make this other person the other, to like to also kind of through this performance find out something about themselves. And in the end, of course, they fall apart, and Dick doesn't respond to any of the letters. Actually, when the book was going to be published, he was like, please don't do this. I'm probably gonna have to sue you. And then what she did is in the afterwards, she said that, oh, he finally responded. He's trying to sue me now, and that became part of the book. So all of these things that they decide to do is a kind of performance that toys with reality, because in the fiction there's its own reality, and it's probably a heightened reality, right? So this is another kind of thing that happens in autofiction. You can see similar examples in works by Tao Lin as well, like Taipei, Shoplifting in America. All of them are kind of formless things about everyday life that kind of happen. And through the writing, you can see that the author is actually confronting and realizing more things about themselves. All of this is done through language. This is Yoko Tawada. 带我听一集. You cannot use the language to express something, but you can work with them together because they are also animals, maybe. It is not about acquiring language, but language itself is the living thing that you're accompanying it. What does this mean? So in her work, Yoko Tawada is a Japanese author, but she's trained in Russian and German literature, and she teaches in Germany. So she writes kind of in between languages. And a lot of writers who are trained in that moment, that history, that kind of time in Japan, 70s, 60s, 70s, because Japanese language is so kind of embedded in nationalism that they feel quite kind of unable to express themselves directly through it. And a famous example is Haruki Murakami, Chunsun Chunsu. He writes in English first, and then translates himself into Japanese, right? That's why his work, if you read it in Japanese, it has the feeling of having been translated. So another mode to approach truth is not just through the act of writing, but writing between languages and different modes of articulation. This is what she says. She thinks that Japanese language is so free, but she doesn't really realize it because it's so embedded in herself. And German is very logical. So her writing is kind of like a combination of both. I do this as well as my own writing. So, and we can call this translanguaging, where there's no original language. And language is just something that there's no original. You use different modes to articulate whatever is in between. So I play with the word binbei, which is constipation. Binbei is constipation. Bin on its own means easy, informal, and ordinary, and comfort. Bei, on the other hand, can mean secret. The words binbei describe this moment better than any English word Glue knows. So yeah, so this person's going through a hard time, and then he can't think of anything to articulate his words in just one language. So he used the translation of Cantonese to articulate that, a kind of deconstructed way. In my first book, You're Eating an Orange, You're Naked, I do something similar. The words koi and li make up the term concept. Koi by itself means approximate and in general, and lim can mean thought or idea. but it can also mean read or recite. When you put the words together, koilim at least means approximately an idea, or not quite an idea yet. And then later on in the story, the person says that the person asks, oh, what's your first language? Or what language do you think in? And often bilingual people get asked this question a lot, like which language do you think in? And then the guy just kind of thinks to himself, I guess I think in koilim. And then the person asking the question goes like, what are you talking about? In a way, language is a tool, but as Yoko Tawada says, that it's also a living thing, right? So this idea of language being a living thing, I kind of do something here in Basha 7, my second novel, where what makes language a living thing, it's the concentricity of it. Just like when we talked about before, the concentric narrative of like the narration within a narration gives the truth. How language moves also goes into its ability to communicate. So this is a section from Basha 7. Language learners, every motion is a gesture. You say this about rain in films by Ozu. The gesture's meaning comes from the response it elicits. When you respond to a gesture, the meaning of your response is sent simultaneously to the preceding gesture and the gestures that come after. Everything we do is in dialogue with something else. But sometimes AI systems struggle to understand this outside a game of Go, where all the rules are set. So I resort to asking my students to close their eyes. Listen to the sounds around you, I say. Think of all the noises as gestures and respond to them with gestures on your own. But they don't move. One breath after another, the classroom's breathing becomes heavier and heavier. Each breath now responds to the one that came before. It gives meaning to what comes after. An organism is formed. Okay, so this is the language, the tool that we're using to articulate all of these things. Here are a couple more examples. This is from 1984, Marguerite Duras' The Lover. It's a famous one about a young French woman in Vietnam and falls in love with like an older Chinese businessman. And she originally, when it first got published, she said that, oh, it's made up, none of this ever happened. But it's not until like later in her life, in like maybe her 60s or 70s, in an interview that she finally admitted that, okay, all of this is actually kind of true, right? Yeah, but again, like, that doesn't matter. That's like that might be the least interesting thing you can ask about a novel like this, because it's quite ahead of its time in terms of its honesty and its like approach to like the nuances of colonization. Here's another example, American one. Bret Easton Ellis, Less Than Zero. He wrote this when he was 21, as a person, a young college student going back to his hometown in summer, and he feels like completely detached from the society. And back then in California, there's a lot of like, in Hollywood especially, the drug culture, the sex scenes that he like kind of he was so embedded in, but kind of feels detached from right now as he goes back. So this kind of alienation felt throughout that generation. He kind of writes this in a very matter-of-fact way, kind of emotionally, like affectively flattened way. This is Transit by Rachel Cusk, quite popular recently, most of her work. This is a part of a trilogy. And this is it's also a very kind of confessional style. It's about a writer who's going through a divorce and then moving to England. And then she kind of has to confront all of the contemporary problems that people have today, like financial problems, economic ones, moral ones. And she writes about it in a very, like she will have interactions with people, but then she will contemplate about that interactions and the culture and the moral implications of all of these little interactions through paragraphs. So writing using kind of autofiction-y way to write also allows for these kind of contemplations on things that we usually find kind of mundane. Knausgaard, probably he has like a 6-book series called My Struggle, Norwegian writer. He is so boring and the books are so long, but it's like one of the most popular autofiction books in the last like 20 years. Because there are moments when when you feel like, oh, life, there's something really deep in this like mundane style of writing. It's just about him like living everyday life as a Norwegian person. And there's moments of truth. And this is where the ethical question comes in, because he says a lot of very unflattering things about his family. Like Chris Kraus, he also got sued by his family. So here comes like another ethical question. Just because you're a writer of books or just because you're a writer, are you entitled or allowed to kind of write about everything that you observe from your point of view? Is that even fair to the people around you, right? He tends to think, yes, I'm just going to do it anyway. A lot of people disagree with him, saying that that's very irresponsible of you. So as a writer, I think a lot of us need to like confront the fact that just because we're the ones who are writing doesn't mean that we can write about whatever we want. Here, Ben Lerner kind of tracks the line in between. 1004 is a popular piece that came out in 2016 about a young New York professor who was recently successful but like was diagnosed with a fatal illness, and he has since then recovered, but then he has to confront a lot of things about his life, and his best friend actually asked him to help her conceive a child, right when he discovered that he might not live too long anymore. So all of these things mixed with the academic scene in New York, he kind of writes about in a very personal way. But he writes it in a way that's very detached, and he's not really judgmental. He's more judgmental towards himself. So that's one approach you want to take if you don't want to be like him, is to like just be a little bit self-deprecating. All right, here's another kind of literary game that we're going to try out. A Visit from the Goon Squad by Jennifer Egan in 2010. She uses PowerPoints to tell a scene. So here we have some characteristics about the character Lincoln. In the middle, we have a full rest is 4 beats long, a half rest is 2 beats. And here and around that, you have the things that connect Lincoln to that fact. He looks like that, but younger and skinnier. Right now, he's obsessed with rock songs that have pauses in them. He knows more than grown-ups about certain things. And here, through this little graph, simple little graph, we kind of understand a little bit about who Lincoln is as a character, right? A kid, likes rock, looks like his dad. All right, but if we take the same kind of format and situate it in like a kind of dilemma, it becomes more interesting because stories are often about conflicts, right? So mom's reason for not talking about that time. It feels like another life. I don't trust my memories. It's also embedded in my own struggles. What struggles? I asked her once. Nothing you need to know about, mom says. This is, my friend did this on a napkin in a bar. So one person would draw the shapes, and the shapes need to overlap somehow. And then in each of the shapes, you would like write about something that you're thinking about in the moment, something that's like underlying your reality right now. So she wrote, what if we see each other more often? And then towards the corner, there's pain and happiness. At the bottom, something to do with reproduction. On the top, what happens to my time? Lies, 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 lies. Nostalgia, this place can be beautiful. In a way, this is kind of like a poem, right? You kind of know something about how the person is feeling in the moment without having too much context. So you only get the feeling or the dilemmas. And this is often the core of like the story or like the truth the story is trying to get close to. In a way, it is a narration, but it's not fleshed out yet. So let's try to do something like this. Draw 4 shapes that overlap with each other. Write something that underlies your reality in one of the spaces that where your shapes overlap. This can be a question, a feeling, even an object. If you're like, an object is really concerning you right now, you can start with that too. almost done. In one of the examples Tejuko kind of brings up in the beginning with the conversation with Haman, is that Lydia Davis's short stories, you can't tell if it's fiction, non-fiction, whatever. You really can't categorize these things. This one is called Getting to Know Your Body. If your eyeballs move, this means that you're thinking or about to start thinking. If you don't want to be thinking at this particular moment, try to keep your eyeballs still. It's just like a random thought or a random moment, right? All of these things often underline our kind of reality. This is the one that I used earlier about the duck, the concentric narration. Happiest moment. If you ask her what is a favorite story she has written, she will hesitate for a long time and say it may be the story she had read in a book once. An English language teacher in China asked his Chinese student to say what was the happiest moment in his life. The student hesitated for a long time. At last, he smiled with embarrassment and said that his wife had gone to Beijing and eaten duck there, and she often told him about it. And he would have to say the happiest moment of his life was her trip and the eating of the duck. Right? I really love this short story because it shows that the truth of the story is told by like another person, knowledge of another person's story, right? In a way, let's do a quick. How many stories are in this story? Shout out a number. Yes? 2 or 3? 4? 5? 4? If you ask her, here's the first person. If you ask her, what is the favorite story she has written? She will hesitate for a long time and say that it may be this story, and this is the story she once read in a book once. An English language teacher in China, this is the story. And then there's the story of the wife going to Beijing. And then this whole thing itself is one story, so it'll be at least 5. Yeah, so the last thing that we're gonna do here, and maybe we'll spend a little bit more time, is to use something like this, these random moments, random thoughts, and add it to everything that you have so far. At the time of this writing, the things you put in the shapes, and just random thoughts. And you will have, by the end of this, when you throw everything together, the beginning of some kind of autofiction piece that you have composed today. So let's give it a try. Does anybody need more paper? No. do you want to take a minute to share with your neighbors what you came up with today? Is that okay? No pressure, only if you feel compelled to. We have a few minutes, right? Yeah. I want to know.
I copied the piece like the happiest moment, and I try to link the act of sipping tea and the oneness of world. But my English is not good, so I hope I can take it as something. If you ask her when was the happiest moment of her life, she would probably tell you it was the time when she read about the story of a monk drinking oolong tea in a monastery. The monk contemplated on how many people in the world don't have access to clean water, and he slowly sips his tea from a small clay pot. As she read this story while sipping tea, also oolong, she felt that the world is a small one, where people collide when doing the same thing in different time and space, yet feel the oneness of the world. This quiet little thought of oneness made her tea taste stronger and fragrant. She knew she doesn't have any panacea for the world's drinking water shortage in less developed parts, but the oneness of the world helped her rejoice in that by every sip of her own tea, she can be connected to people far away around the world, and she can enjoy a day of such magical encounter in reading.
Well, that's very beautiful. Yeah. I like that your story
Mine is not as beautiful as yours. It's very practical. I am sitting in a workshop thinking about my suitcase. I'm supposed to be learning about autofiction. I wonder if anyone else is thinking about their chores instead of the writing task about random thoughts. Toiletries, sketchbook, walking shoes, fancy shoes, bathing suit. Will I really go swimming? Just in case. Don't forget laptop cord. The instructor is walking around, so I self-consciously cover the list with my hand, and I do as instructed. I scribble, at the time of this writing. Any other brave people? Oh.
To yours, Laura. Mine feel very pretentious. So I use a lot. I really like the at the time of this writing prompt, so I think I use a lot of that. At the time of this writing, I miss Scotland. I am back in Hong Kong for the first time in 10 years. I miss rice. Last night, I walked outside looking for a place to eat till my feet hurt. I miss doing nothing with someone nice. But at the time of this writing, I just turned down a date with a guy from Bumble because I'm afraid he might be a creep. I read that Jennifer Lopez and Ben Affleck might be breaking up for the second time. I walk around looking at books, listening to music. There are dark clouds gathering outside, and I only just remembered that I forgot to pack my umbrella. I wonder if I'm a good enough writer to be doing author events anyways. I wonder if my dreams are aligning with my reality. At the time of this writing, I think they might not. I keep thinking, more time, just a little bit more time with you. At the time of this writing, I am missing someone who is so far away. I am not sure if they're thinking of me too. Do you think of me too, like I think of you?
Oh, amazing. Yeah, it really captured the structural feelings. There's emergent, residual. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, also personal history and imagination. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, yes.
So mine talks about the future, basically. So Hong Kong's anime convention starts in a week. So does the rehearsal for the cosplay competition finals that I have to perform in. At the time of this writing, Donald Trump has gone back on stage in all his pompadour earshot glory, literally. At the time of this writing, the roots of my many friendships have rot away like the many attempts I tried to grow a mango tree. At the time of this writing, baseless infatuations for multiple people have started to develop. At the time of this writing, the primordial fear demon I scrapped together with trash from my university sits on the unused top bunk in my parents' room, waiting to be worn next week in all of its sweat, heat, and hopefully camera-driven glory. At the time of this writing, I fantasize about the other cosplays I might see and right from the slutted eye hole of that of my own. My recordings for that performance are filled with off-center frames, very clunky animating, and at the time of this writing, my fingertips are still stained with the demon's victims of cane sugar, honey, red pigments of the fake blood I've been using instead of ketchup a month ago.
I really like the kind of nostalgia for the future that you kind of create here. You have so many feelings about things that haven't happened yet. Yeah, cool. All right, thank you so much, everybody, for participating and sharing. I hope that was of interest. Yeah, I guess we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sheung, for such an interesting workshop. We perhaps will now move on to the Q&A session. If anyone in the audience have questions they would like to ask our guest speaker, you're more than welcome to do so now.
Thank you. One, two. Okay. I'm just curious, when you write your books, do you jot down some details that you can maybe observe in your daily life and then try to combine them into a story like you just showed us? Or it's more like suddenly you got a picture in your mind, like maybe it's not from the real life, but maybe you kind of combine things from the past of your own and then make a story, like which way maybe suits you more?
Personally, I usually write about things that I kind of feel. So that's why I use the framework of the structural feeling so often, is because how one's kind of affective response towards like a moment. I think that trying to capture it through story is something that I tend to kind of do. So if there's like a moment of I feel there's some kind of disquiet in the room or like in a social relationship, I try to like find the things that give rise to those moments. So instead of like a detail or anything, it's usually affect that like drives me. Yeah. That's a good question. Thank you so much.
Any further questions from the audience? One at the back.
That section that you talked about, the I Love Dick book, was very interesting. Like, do you think like what? And you mentioned like at the ethics of it, that the person, like the dick person, is actually like suing them. Well, personally, do you think there should be a line drawn somewhere when it comes to like writing that basically involves other people? That maybe some people might argue that art should reflect life and what like things should be allowed for the sake of art, but do you think there are certain like lines that should be drawn, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think so. For my second book, Bachelor 7, my publisher actually had like lawyers read through it because I critique Disney a lot. I also critique certain like kind of work structures a lot, and these things are true, and I think some of these things need to be talked about, but it's also about protecting yourself from these other people who might take offense to what you're trying to do. So I mean that's an important thing that I think I myself need to do to protect myself, and of course I don't want the people who are working with me on this to be in trouble too. And in terms of writing about other people, I often fictionalize it enough, even though it's drawn from like a real person or like a real event that happened. And I think what's most interesting about drawing from so-called or reality or like actual events is that it's the core of that event. How the event unfolds, you can use narration to like stylize it or aestheticize it. But if the core of the event is about like, let's say, this moment of like pain or this moment of happiness, as long as that is retained, I think that's also okay. And that's when the writer actually has the liberty to like do what they are trained to do. I hope that kind of answers your question.
Any other questions from other members of the audience?
Yes. Sorry.
Who are your favorite authors?
Oh, my favorite authors? I really like Yoko Tawada, the one I mentioned, 带我听一集. She's so smart, and her stories are very kind of experimental, plays with language, betweenness of cultures a lot. I think she really influenced the writing of my first book, You Were Eating an Orange, You Were Naked, because she juxtaposes a lot of like folk tales of contemporary issues. So there's like a moment of like historicity or like myth that's brought into like the discussion of contemporary events. And that kind of juxtaposition makes me feel like everything that's happening right now can be explained, not necessarily completely logically, through like just acts of telling stories and putting things together. And that kind of play with form is something that I was really drawn to when I was writing my first book. Yeah, I like most of the people that were shown as examples today as well. Yeah.
Thank you. I think the title of your first book is quite interesting, so
Thank you.
I'm gonna buy that one. But so, why do you think people who like your first book should also or will also like your second book?
They're very different, I have to be honest. The first one is very kind of emotional, very nostalgic, very passionate. It's a transnational love story. People are traveling together. They're telling each other stories, trying to communicate. The second one is more sarcastic, more cynical, more funny in a way. But I think the second one. What's interesting about it, there are lots of QR codes inside. You can scan the QR codes, and when the person who's constipated is on the toilet scrolling through his phone, you can actually experience the kind of digital walk that he's doing while he's doing that. So there's a digital component to the second one, and it's quite experimental. So if you're interested in that kind of play with form, then I think both would actually be of interest because they both play with form in different ways.
So you emphasized a lot about the fluidity of genres a lot. So is that why you have, like in both of your books now I see, that you label them as a novel more than anything?
Yeah. Yeah, that's an excellent question. Thank you. There are so many definitions of novels. Like some literary critics insist that there's this thing called a novel, and then it has like a European tradition, right? But like let's say Chinese novels are more fixated on like the poeticness of it, or like the history that it covers. So usually like a Chinese novel would cover like a long period of time, right? And so I think because of the kind of different traditions that go into like what a novel is, it's the easiest way to define these books. And in a way, it is a novel. It doesn't really have like a traditional novelistic structure, like the hero's journey or whatnot. It's more like that. But nonetheless, it has a beginning and end. It captures the feelings that a novel would capture. So I think that's a good framing for my work. Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a good one.
Does anyone else have a question they would like to ask?
Do you have one?
Yeah, I actually do.
Oh, thank you.
Let me think about how to phrase it. What's the most like rewarding part of being a writer to you personally?
Oh, that's a really lovely question. Thank you. I think it's moments like this when you share a room with people who are interested in writing and have other people also write and kind of experience or give ways for people to also access writing. That's also why I also teach, and I enjoy teaching a lot because writing is often a very solitary act. You just do it alone at night when it's quiet, right? But after writing a book for 4 years, you have a few months when you can share with other people your experiences and tell stories, and have all of you tell me stories as well. So this might be the most rewarding. Yeah, thank you.
Do you think like the months of solitary writing make like the sharing after the years of solitary writing make up for it? Make
Yeah.
up for the loneliness and stuff. Okay,
Yeah,
sure.
but I just turned 30. Maybe I'll have a different answer later on in life.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. Does anyone else have like a final question they would like to ask? Oh, one last one.
Because just now you asked us to do the sharing,
Yeah.
and then at that moment I realized how private is it for me in writing. So I'm curious, like, do you feel the same way? And I don't know, how do you process that feeling?
Oh, that's an excellent question. That's why I also like the confessional style of writing that I use that example by Kenzaburo Oe, because I think there's a kind of honesty that comes through, and he's really not afraid to explore that part, because you have to believe that you're not alone when you're writing about this kind of very personal things. He's politically, he's an anarchist and humanist. He fundamentally believes that like there are human kind of struggles that he is able to kind of articulate through his experience and his writing, and maybe there's a kind of almost romantic belief that like I'm not alone in this, and when I tell the story, people will also realize that they are not alone in this, and that might be one of the things that help you kind of feel more compelled to articulate the things you drew in the little squares.
So, thank you, Mr. Sheung King, for your wonderful sharing, and the audience for your excellent questions.